Hello, hello, hello. Sorry the camera's wiggling here. There. I'll just hold it. I'm going to try not to make this too long. Yeah, title's going to be something about rites of passage. I was watching a very interesting discussion. Some folks in what they call the estuary, a group that I'm really wondering if it's a cult. I'm smelling a lot of cult crap going on, but it's a very bizarre group because it's not a homogenous religious group. It's an eclectic melange of different faiths, like an interfaith group. And I've got a video asking the question about the TLC and Midwestuary and Paul Vanderklay, and that goes into the cult aspect. But what I was watching was a different member of that group, um, Jacob Faturechi. He's a Jewish streamer whose channel seems to focus on educating people about the actual beliefs and practices of, I guess, traditional mainstream Judaism. He doesn't appear to be one of the fringe cult, Third Temple accelerationist types. He seems pretty mainstream. And he seems to be there for the purpose, according to what he says he self identifies, um, to help people understand what's going on with actual Jewish doctrine, especially since there were so many Christians with air quotes, running around claiming all this ancient the true meaning of the Hebrew word, blah, 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 blah. I don't blame him for deciding he needs to put his 2 cents into that. And he called his stream Monsters in the estuary being the movement that appears to be a pseudo Christian cult to me, to my own personal suspicions. I'm only starting to look at it. So he puts up this stream in which he wants to confront somebody um, who's focused heavily, professionally, has a website dedicated and everything to it, on converting Jews to Jesus, which is a big thing. But when you get into this little cluster between the Third Temple Jewish group, which is really, really out there, and the Zionist Christians who claim to be part of them, but yet they're very dedicated to making sure they become Christian, and they're doing the Third Temple thing without understanding that the Third Temple is not about Jesus at all. So it gets weird. So I don't know quite. This Christian guy is someone who's focused heavily on trying to make Jews become Christian, born again evangelicals. And so Jacob Faturechi wanted to confront him, and he did. He came on the stream. They had a conversation. And one of the things I noticed that I think is central to the conflict, not central to their argument, which, as usual, this kind of arguments stick to chapter and verse of what did Jesus say, what did this one in the Bible say, what does the Old Testament say, blah blah blah, all the counting of angels on the head of a pin. The real issue between Jew and Gentile, and Jacob Faturechi touched it without recognizing or acknowledging what he was touching. It's called rites of passage. In the Jewish culture, I'm going to send him a link to this video so he can correct me where I'm wrong, because I do not make any claims to deep scholarly study. But my general impression is that in Jewish culture, the rite of passage is the bar mitzvah. In the girl's case, they call it a bat mitzvah. And our experience of some of what happened to my daughter who's not a Jew. My family's not Jewish at all, ever. None of us, except one who converted because she got knocked up by a Jew. And she went from being a fanatical Catholic to being a fanatical Jew. And oh, she was glad now she had really had a victim card she could play. I don't know what she's going for after she wears that one out. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. That's personal family crap. Um, but this bar mitzvah thing, we did find out about it because we had continuous conflict in our school system with the incoming Jewish New York City Jewish community that was basically taking over, literally, like taking over and openly announcing that only Jews could rent or buy in certain district of town where they will. I mean, literally, that kind of conflict is very real. New York Jews moved into Berkshire County in a very aggressive manner in the 1980s. And my daughter was in middle school. We had to deal with it. One of the things we had to deal with was the sexualization of kids at age 12 and 13. And I actually had to go to some Jewish parents at a ski area where my daughter was skiing. And I was there, and this little boy, the same age, they were 12, 13 years old. He came over and said something to me. She wasn't skiing with him. She wasn't paying any attention to him. She was off with her friends. But apparently, he wanted to speak to her. And he came over to me and he showed me a handful of money. And he said this was his bar mitzvah money. And I said, yeah. Well, he said, I'm talking to her. And he points at my daughter because it was weird. And I just said, well, and he asked me something about, could you go out with him? These kids were 12 years old. I actually went over to his parents. And I said, hey, I don't want your son talking to my daughter. I said, I don't know what's going on here, but she's playing with her friends. And they just like, whoa, what that? And I'm sure they went off with stories of anti-Semitism. Shiksa. We know what the word shiksa means, Jacob. And we know, I found out the hard way. That wasn't the only incident. When I was shocked and I spoke to other people about it, other parents of other kids who were not Jewish because they were in my community, I said, Denise, what did you expect? You're letting your daughter play with the Jew kids all the time and we don't know why. I said, well, what's the problem? I didn't understand this. At bar mitzvah, that's their rite of passage. The kid's only 13 years old. He's told to go play with the shiksas because he's going to have to marry a Jewish woman chosen for him by his family. They still do that. Jacob can deny it, but it's obvious in his discussions. He knows they still do that. And this is the issue. If your culture has a rite of passage into adulthood at age 13, which is not uncommon going back in time to agricultural and pastoral biblical times. Yeah, when you were 13 or 14, you started having sex and you had babies because you were probably going to be dead before you were 30 anyway. Life was short. Families were young. Only the occasional person got to get as old as me. It's not like it is today. And in American culture, American Gentile culture, we have a rite of passage. But the rites of passage for our young men and young women are much older. The traditional rite of passage in American culture for a girl, up until recently when there's no rites of anything anymore, everything is a mess, But back in the 60s and 70s, when there were still traditional families, the 16th birthday, the debutante was a 16-year-old girl. Her birthday party at age 16 was when she was free to start dating and, looking at her future. Young men tended to, it wasn't as formal as a debutante birthday party, but it was like basically between 16 and 18, they'd get their first car. In those days, a young kid would have an after school job and make enough money to buy a car. They'd turn 18, and basically at that point, and there was, so many teenagers, and I was one of them, waiting for that 18th birthday because then we could do whatever we wanted. We didn't have to go by the rules anymore because it was a rite of passage into adulthood in a free country. Jews do not have, never had, and never will have a free country. They are slaves to their own culture. The rite of passage at age 13 is simply a rite of sexual maturity, which, as I point out, when your group has a much younger tradition of sexual maturity than the group in which you're interacting, that created serious problems, because we did have some serious problems in the school system with sexual activities being promoted by certain adults, and certain other adults who were part of the traditional Catholic and general Protestant, old fashioned Protestant, but mostly Catholic working class population that was being pushed out and is now pretty much gone, pushed out by the incoming New York Jews, because they were converting all their vacation homes into permanent homes. And New York City, Westchester County, right on the border. Berkshire County is the western edge of Massachusetts. It borders with New York. It borders with Westchester County. So there's a lot of population interaction there. And my personal experience runs pretty deep with some of it because of the arts. That was another big part of it, was the New York City art scene and the Berkshire County art scene had an interesting relationship. And I'm retired, but yes, I've been a professional artist. I've had lots of day jobs, but someday I'll go into my art career. I'll have to dig some stuff out and show you. But anyway, the rites of passage, if you're talking in a non religious setting, if you're talking to anthropologists or sociologists or social psychologists, they will go in depth on all of the various meanings and conflicts that a rite of passage from childhood to adulthood represents, and the different rites of passage. Like, as I say, the bar mitzvah is basically, I don't know completely what it represents. I'm not Jewish, but I know that from what we had to deal with, it represents at least partly a sexual rite of passage. But it also represents various things among Jewish men as to what they move into as young teenagers, becoming young adults. But apparently, there is no rite of passage in Jewish culture at all that recognizes the right to choose your own path spiritually, socially, religiously. And of course, in this argument between, or debate or discussion, conversation between Jacob and the evangelical, who I'm not naming because I don't feel like naming trash. I respect Jacob. He was standing up for his community in a respectable way. Because the Jews do have the right to stand up for their community. They don't have the right to destroy our community. And Jacob didn't seem to be acknowledging that, in fact, this has been very serious, because he might not even know it. I, for example, really didn't know much about what was going on with the criminal side of some of my family members, because I wasn't out there experiencing it from them. I saw different things on the inside that eventually I did figure out what was going on, because I wasn't cooperating with some of it. And thus, as I say, I ended up coming down here to Texas. Oh, I started to go into this in another video and I didn't finish it. I'm going to have to stop because there's a limit to how much I can record here. But basically, there's a part of this that's never talked about, and it's not the religious doctrinal history, the stupid, stupid protocols of Zion. That's a propaganda hoax. Okay, I don't know, what is it, 500 years old or something? It's still a stupid propaganda hoax. And the 6 million Jews who died in the Holocaust. Jacob, that was only half of the people who were killed in those death camps. I have actually personally known 4 survivors of the death camps. One from Treblinka, one from Auschwitz, and an elderly couple that was living next door in my childhood that my mother simply identified that they had, we kids were complaining that they were kind of grouchy. And she said to us, they were in the death camps. And I was old enough to say, well, what's that? What are you talking about? She said, well, it's in the war. You'll learn about it in school. But they came out of that. Well, none of these people were Jewish, Jacob. They were all Catholic. They were all Polish Catholics. The Polish Catholics were on the same list to be eliminated as the Jews and other groups that Hitler's people did not like. And Hitler was, that's a whole different ball of wax right there. Interesting character, because he has actually both Catholic and Jewish heritage in his background. If people, you go into that rabbit hole. It's not important. It's not what this is about. What this is about, though, is that there are these issues that are completely set aside while people argue about interpretations of obscure passages of the Old and New Testaments. When the real fight is about dealing with people who are calling your daughter Shiksa and telling their sons she's fair game to play with. He wasn't the only one. I mean, like I said, there were other parents that also had to deal with this. Steve Hassan was hired to stalk my daughter by that mafia connected sister. And as I was trying to explain, the Jewish American community, yes, I'm anti Semitic, if that's what it takes. I'm not against the Jewish heritage, the Jewish people, the Jewish nation. And Semitism involves other religions of Abraham, the various Arab groups. I'm against the ones that mess with my people for what they're doing. But nobody wants to talk about that. Everything's got to be, let's talk about the protocols of Zion and the obscure passages of the Bible in the Old Testament. Let's use Jesus as a club to beat somebody over the head with. That's not Christian, what that guy, that so-called evangelical is doing. Evangelicals, for the most part, are not Christian. They're completely heretical. But that's, there they are. The Jewish culture has its right to exist, but it does not have the right to control. It has the right to defend itself. But this whole thing about how we discuss these things never gets to the meat of the problem. That's why the fight will never end. I hope that Jacob wants to look a little further into this because I don't think he knows the real story of what's going on with Steve Hassan and Rick Ross. I sent him a message in X asking him to have a conversation. He probably won't answer because I've noticed this. One of the cult aspects of this TLC group, they'll openly say things and welcoming and everything. They don't answer. They'll put little hearts on your comments. But I guess if you're not in there in the circle, your emails don't get answered, your messages don't get. I don't know, man. I'm being unfair. Jacob might or might not be in with that. I don't even know if he considers himself a real part of the TLC. Because, like I say, it's basically, I'm looking at it as a pseudo Christian cult. But I think it's actually an atheist cult because the one that I'm identifying as really doing the cult like maneuverings is LARPing as a pastor. His name's Paul Vanderklay. And he's promoting some real nasty stuff in doing the whole cult playbook thing of having a reasonable looking, intelligent, friendly personality as the leader. That's him. Promoting some very disturbing, satanic, frankly, unhinged looking people and kind of setting up a dynamic where you're the bad guy if you question the nutcase he's promoting, the Discordian chaos magic crap he promotes. While he pretends he's a ordinary conservative Dutch Reformed church, real old school Protestant, plain vanilla Christian. Now, Jacob Faturechi is focused heavily on um, the Jewish targeted or the Jew targeting evangelical. And he probably isn't looking that closely at what Vanderklay's doing. I don't think anybody's really looking that closely at him. A few people seem to have kind of wondered, and I might be the only one articulating it. That might be my ministry. I'm a compulsive articulator. But yeah, it's an interesting problem, and I think the problem is the unwillingness or the willingness to cover real world issues with esoteric, intellectual, literary, scriptural discussions that don't really touch the real issue. The real issue here is if you don't have a rite of passage into being a free adult, you cannot. That's why Jacob gave the example of, well, you would object if we went after. And the Christian was kind of like, oh, well, maybe if you were violating college property issues. Like, he didn't even get it. He didn't even come back with him and say, no, a Christian in college, at college age, 19, 20 years old, is a young adult. And he's responsible. If he chooses to suddenly decide he's going to convert to be a Jew, he answers for that to God, but his parents don't have anything to say about it. They don't. But that didn't even, it is so natural to us to respect the freedom of our young adults that it didn't even occur to the evangelical that that's what Jacob was doing. And it's so natural to Jacob that a Jew is never, ever a free adult. That it didn't occur to him that what he was saying about the college campus wouldn't really mean anything to someone from a Christian culture. And I think that's just one of many such issues that are responsible for the rise in anti Semitism, because free adults, freedom loving people, see the Jews as just as much of a threat to our freedom as some people, you know, will say the Muslims are. And what's really odd about it is the Jews support the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party supports the Muslims. The Muslims are at physical, actual military war with Israel, and the Jewish Muslim thing is way more war like than the Jewish Christian thing, although the Jewish Christian thing is beginning to approach that level because of our inability to really face the real issues. They are not issues of Jesus or what Jesus said or what the Bible says. They are issues of what is a free adult. And when do you back the hell off and leave people alone? That's the kind of thing we need to talk about. Denise Matteau, over and out. Thank you for being here. Oh, subscribe and like and share and do all that good stuff. And thank you for being here. Over and out.